Hello out there, management scholars. This is Dr. T, and we've got Chapter 3 Spotlights. Well, as you can see, Chapter 3 is covering the manager's changing work environment and ethical responsibilities. And what I did, for my in-person class, I really like to use images and charts and graphics because it can mean so much more than just reading a bunch of words off of a PowerPoint slide. So if we take these one at a time, the manager's changing work environment, look at how some of the things have changed throughout the years, right? So this is a current snapshot of the U.S. cannabis map, but this has changed. Like when I was growing up, all of these states, so red is illegal. All 50 states would have been red. And then a handful of years ago, the two states who legalized marijuana use for even recreational use were Colorado and Washington. So we would have had two green, everything else red, but look how it's more and more green and less red, with a few mixed in of blue indicating legal for medicinal use. And so it's just a way to demonstrate how times have changed, how things change, and as a manager, you have to adapt to some of these changes. If we look back here for some of the societal changes, other societal changes, women back in the 50s really weren't in a position to lead others. And so this is a typing pool. And if you notice, like it's all women. And the image doesn't show it, but it was probably some guy who was in charge, and he would bark orders to the women here, and they would just have to type whatever they were told. But then when we fast forward to today, and thankfully there were some trailblazers out there. There were some women who shattered all these glass ceilings after glass ceilings. I really like this image, right? Because today, just a mere 70 years later, which isn't like ancient history. It's not, like just going way back hundreds of years. But in 70 years, look, when we fast forward, this woman is in charge here. She's running the show. She's the CEO. Everyone's looking up at her. And so some of these changes are really, really good, and they're positive, and it gives everybody an opportunity to be a leader, to be a manager. And so that's part of what we'll talk about here. And then we'll talk a little bit about this thing called the triple bottom line. And then we'll also get into this thing about stakeholders, how companies don't operate in a vacuum, but things companies do affect others, and we call those other people outside, well, inside and outside the company. We call them stakeholders. Let me build this slide up a little bit here. Okay, here we go. So this thing called the triple bottom line. So once again, we've evolved. Years and years ago, decades ago, companies pretty much just focused on this, when we call it the triple P, the profit, the people, and the planet. But initially, managers and leaders put their focus on profitability, and that was, who cares? Who cares if we grind the people down into a pulp with horrible working conditions? As long as it makes us more profitable, who cares about the people? Who cares about the planet? Who cares if we dump our toxic waste in people's water supply? Let them figure it out, as long as we're profitable. But that has shifted. So now more and more companies, two of which I would highlight are Ben & Jerry's and Patagonia. There's many others out there, maybe you can think of some, who focus not only on the financial profitability, but how can they make the workplace better for the people? How can they make their company better for the planet in terms of sustainability, the 3 R's, reduce, reuse, recycle, things like that. And so they're all important. And because these have gained more attention in the past, and I'm talking about people and the planet here, we can't ever forget that it is still important to be profitable. We can't just throw this out the window, because if you're doing really great things in a community or for people and for the planet, but if you fail to remain profitable, then maybe you're going to go out of business, and all the people you're employing are no longer going to have a job. Maybe your competitors don't focus on the planet, so now we're going to have companies out there doing things that don't really think about or consider the planet. So it's important to still put attention on the profitability. That's how companies stay in business. we had this discussion. I know this is online, and it kind of, it's my loss because I won't get to hear your direct feedback, but we had a really good discussion about, like, for Gen Z, people of your generation, what drives you in terms of your ideal workplace? What is your ideal in terms of your career vision? Are you driven just because you want to make more money, or are you interested in other things like, does your job have purpose? Do you feel like you're giving back to others? Do you have work-life balance? And each generation views things a little bit differently. And although I'm not able to hear, think about for yourself what is important to you in terms of your career and your future. So I mentioned earlier about stakeholders. We define stakeholders as the people and other organizations whose interests are affected by an organization's activities. Once again, companies don't operate in a vacuum. Things companies and businesses do ultimately impact other people. And it impacts other people, other companies internally. These are the employees, the owners, the board of directors, defined as the internal stakeholders. And then when we get out here to the external stakeholders, it's really two separate buckets, if you will, defined by the task environment and the general environment. So within the task environment, notice it's a little closer to the internal stakeholders, although these are still external to the company, yet very important. Media, interest groups, government, lenders, unions, allies, distributors, suppliers, competitors. These are all individuals and other companies who are connected to this company somehow. They're stakeholders. Think about if you have a big scandal, the media will be all over it. The media is part of the stakeholder community. And as we go a little bit further out, now we're into this thing called the general environment. And these are things like economic forces, international forces, political and legal forces, demographic forces, socio-cultural forces, and technological forces. It's important to understand that business leaders have a lot of control here, almost complete control here, and once they get outside of the internal stakeholder environment, when they're in the task and the general environment, here there's very little to no control. This is where leaders and managers have to use influence to get some of these external stakeholders to do things that are going to be favorable to the company. If you think about the political and legal forces, think about all the tariff changes. That comes from the political environment, but ultimately it's going to impact the company itself and the internal stakeholders. So it's all connected, is the point. All right, ethics we define as the standards of right and wrong that influence behavior. It says here that it may vary among countries and cultures, and this is true to some degree. Some countries it's okay to bring a gift and it's not really frowned upon, or it's not considered an ethical violation. But in the U.S., maybe if you're a government contractor, you're forbidden from taking a gift from somebody or bidding on a government contract, because if you receive a gift and never awarded the contract, it could be seen as, hey, it was favoritism because they gave you and you accepted a gift. So it can vary a little bit from different countries and different cultures. And then values are the relatively permanent and deeply held underlying beliefs and attitudes that help determine a person's behavior. So I would call that individual values, but then we can expand values a little bit further, and we'll see it on the next slide here about corporate values or company values. I would highlight that when ethics are violated, when we have unethical behavior, really bad things happen to a multitude of stakeholders. And here are three very popular ones. There's countless ethical scandals out there. We've got the Volkswagen diesel scandal, diesel emissions scandal. Wells Fargo was guilty of creating false accounts so their salespeople could get paid more. And then my favorite, most intriguing, fascinating one to me is Elizabeth Holmes in Theranos, where she duped investors and basically the whole world into believing that they could create this machine that would give you 50 plus outcomes from a single drop of blood. But the whole thing was just smoke and mirrors. It was fake. It was not possible. She knew it, and she continued to rake in money from investors in something that she knew she couldn't produce. There's a number of ways that companies can promote more ethical behavior. And so I won't go into each and every one of these. The one that I think is if we can connect ethics to the organization's values. And the best case scenario is when ethics are connected to organizational values or corporate values, and then the company's individual values align with those, we will be less likely to see unethical behavior. And I just put this as an example here. The Army has made their values into an acronym, which makes it very easy to remember, to understand. And so with loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage, we get the acronym leadership. And so it's just a way to kind of internalize values. Other companies do similar things. When it comes to corporate social responsibility, that's what this acronym stands for, corporate social responsibility. We've got two different viewpoints. I'm not here to tell you which one is right, which one is wrong. You can determine that based on your analysis and your beliefs. But if you're in the Milton Friedman bucket, he's passed away, some years ago, but he was an award-winning economist. And he believed in the invisible hand. He believed that government should stay out of the free market, just let the market determine things. So he was not a supporter of corporate social responsibility. In fact, in his quote here, he says, the only corporate social responsibility a company has is to maximize its profits. And if a company remains profitable, remember that triple bottom line, the focus is on the profitability, then the people things and the planet things will just fall into place naturally. On the other side of that, folks who think that we need to be more deliberate in terms of supporting the triple bottom line or being socially responsible as a company is Indra Nooyi, who is she's no longer serving, but she served for many years as the CEO of PepsiCo. And under her leadership, PepsiCo had great success. They were very competitive with Coca-Cola. But she had this term called performance with a purpose. That was a big thing. So she really cared about the people and the planet. And yet, even while focused on those two things, PepsiCo was very profitable under her leadership. So she was capturing the triple bottom line. Okay, well, listen, that's going to wrap up Chapter 3 Spotlights. I hope you found this interesting. I hope you found it helpful. If you have any questions about anything, the content, the course, here's how to reach out to me. Thank you so much. Stay safe out there with the winter storm barreling down on us this weekend. Stay safe and have a great day. Good night, Hawks.